everybody, how you doing? As you can see, I'm not in my usual cave. I'm in our office actually because it's a little easier to control with the aircon. Anyway, it's time to do my July reading wrap up for this past month. Now there's a couple days left. I'm recording this a little before the end of the month. Usually I wait until the month is over before I record these monthly wrap up videos. But as I'm flying out early tomorrow morning with my family back to the United States for 3 weeks, I'm going to call this July just now. I'll be in the States technically on the 31st Friday of July, but I'll be doing things with my family and other stuff, and I won't have a chance to read much, most likely, or finish much. So I think this is pretty fair to call this a month right now as it stands. And it was a, not extensive reading month. I only read 3 novels and about 8 short stories or novellas. Some of the novellas were quite long though, so altogether they work out to be a book or book and a half anyway worth. So yeah, not a great month, but this was a very busy month. I had a lot of things to do to wrap up my work schedule at my 2 different universities and prepare for this upcoming trip and all that other stuff. So excuses, what can I say? Anyway, I did read some things. Some of them I've already talked about on this channel. Especially I talked about some things for Private Eye July. This month was, of course, Private Eye July. And I did read 3 novels for that BookTube event. And I also read several short stories, which I'll talk about here a little bit. But some of the books I already talked about on the channel, including Traps Need Fresh Bait. Let me see if I can get the glare off of this one. I talked about this in another dedicated video along with the next book I'll show, but this is one of the Bertha Cool and Donald Lamb mystery novels, Private Eye novels set. This one was published in, I believe, 1967, and this is a good one. This is the 28th out of 30, and I talked about its plot and other things about the book in that other video, which I'll link to in the description down below. But it was a good, fun read. Stanley Gardner is always a breezy. He's got a breezy writing style that's really easy to read through, and he's good at the rat-a-tat-tat language and dialogue and description. And this was a fun book full of a few cool twists. Donald Lamb, the pint-sized detective that always has an eye for the ladies, and they often fall for him and his kind of stoic but clever ways. He's got a massive brain. He's no good in a fight, but boy is he smart, and he figures out the kind of insurance racket plot in this one and gets it all tied up at the end. It's quite a lot of fun. And his partner, Bertha Cool, kind of big, brusque, money-hungry partner, but she's got his back when he needs it. Good stuff. Recommend this series. It's originally they were written or published under the name A.A. Fair, which was Erle Stanley Gardner's pseudonym for this series because he was popping out so many Perry Mason novels. I guess he didn't want to flood the market under his own name. Anyway, well worth reading. I reviewed that one along with this Raymond Chandler novel, the 4th. This is The Lady in the Lake. This is my Penguin edition of this, Green for Crime Penguin. And very easy to read. And this was, again, a fantastic novel. This was a reread of sorts for me because I had read this novel quite a long time ago and, probably several decades. But it's an excellent PI crime novel like the Bertha Cool and Donald Lamb novel, Traps Need Fresh Bait. This is also set in Los Angeles, although the Los Angeles of, wartime, World War II setting, so a good, 24 years before, I guess, this the Donald Lamb book came out. But Philip Marlowe, great protagonist. Chandler writes wonderfully, full of great wisecracks and beautiful and not overly florid kind of descriptions, just very vivid and poetic, mixed with some really good rat-a-tat-tat dialogue. And a nice twisty mystery. I enjoyed that one a lot too. And the third and final mystery novel that I read, or detective novel that I read, was this one, Murder on the Line. This is a book that Nick from the Book Graveyard sent me last year. And it's pretty cool. It's pretty thin, but, very tiny print in this old paperback. I think it came in a bag, and I took it out of its bag to read it, of course. And this is I believe, a gold medal book. You see the gold medal emblem there. And this is by William L. Rohde. I couldn't find out much about Mr. Rohde. I don't know if that's a pen name. I have a couple of, I could find a couple of books written by him. Certainly reads like a guy who's, knows his way around a good yarn. And this was a good, solid meat and potatoes detective book, story. It was originally published as High Red for Dead, a title which makes sense with the way the narrative plays out. Anyway, this one focuses on a railroad detective. I guess he is a private detective of a sort. He's employed. He's a operative for the railroad. This is a railroad up somewhere in New England, and it's having a whole bunch of problems, possibly sabotage and theft of, cargo from the freight trains. And there's a murder at the beginning of this book, and Detective Mohawk Daniels, so called because he's part Iroquois, I guess. A big strapping guy, got an eye for the ladies. He's also a real estate developer buying up land around this lake in this kind of mountain resort area. And there's a bunch of criminal activity going on, and he's up to his neck in it. He sleeps with a couple of attractive ladies, one or both of whom may be involved with the murder or the various crimes going on, which have something to do with, racketeers and, betting or kind of illegal gambling. And getting tips through railroad lines, telegraph lines. Anyway, there's some pretty cool action scenes, a couple of good fist fights that Mohawk Daniels gets in. He goes by Mo usually, or Daniels. And he's under pressure from his bosses to clean up the case, but he doesn't want to spill anything lest he gets some innocent people involved that he doesn't want to. And again, there's some romance, some good back and forth, and a pretty exciting section where he's being fired at. He and one of the love interests in this book are being shot at by a rifle somewhere in the mountains up by this abandoned boxcar area. And he and the woman have to hightail it out, get out safely and make it over through the woods overnight. Pretty exciting stuff. Good book. Has a nice reveal, pretty much, par for the course for a private detective yarn, but it was a good one. I enjoyed it quite a bit. I wish I knew more about this writer. Maybe it's a pseudonym. Maybe someone else will have some more knowledge about William L. Rohde, R-O-H-D-E, or Rohde. Possibly it's Rohde. Anyway, paging Eric at the Paperback Warrior. He might know more. Or some of my viewers, please tell me if you do know anything about this writer. I imagine he wrote a lot of pulp stories because he's a good writer, good solid writer. Okay, after that, and I already released a video recently about these. I read some cool stories out of the newish collection. It's not new. It came out in 1998, but it's the good old stuff, pictured up here, and it's about. It's a great anthology put together by editor Gardner about classic science fiction, adventure, high adventure, cool science fiction written to a high standard. That's kind of Dozois' operating basis for this anthology. And I read end of the previous month, end of June, I read Exploration Team out of that, which is a favorite of mine I first encountered in this volume by Murray Leinster. Really fun kind of planetary survey colony sort of adventure story. Very cool. And then I read in this anthology The Rull by A.E. Van Vogt, The Second Night of Summer by James M. Schmitz, and The Sky People by Poul Anderson. Those were all novelettes, all fairly lengthy, just like Exploration Team. Most of the works in this anthology, the good old stuff that Dozois chose, are kind of meaty novelettes. Anyway, those were all great in different ways. I talked about them in detail in that recent video. And finally, to finish up and wrap up the month and Private Eye July, I read a few more stories or novelettes. I guess these ones classify as stories. I read 3 stories out of this. First Cases. This is a compilation edited by Robert J. Randisi, who again knows his way around here. Can I get the glare off? Randisi knows his way around not only Western tales, but also crimes and detective stories. Now these are a series of anthologies. I believe this is the fourth one, volume 4, and they supposedly, I don't know, they're supposed to be first cases. I don't know if that's true about all of these because some of them don't read like first cases, but there are a handful of stories about different kinds of detectives. So some of these here are lawyers, some are police captains or sergeants or homicide detectives. I didn't want to read any of those because those technically aren't private detectives, but there are 4 in here that are private detectives. The story featuring Trace by Warren Murphy, one of the creators of the Destroyer Men's Adventure series. He's a real fun writer, really sharp, and I read most of that story, but I haven't finished it yet, so I'm not going to call it for this particular video for the month. But that's a story about a kind of guy, a private detective who works for an insurance company. That one seems fun. But the ones I did read were The Night I Died by Mickey Spillane. And that one is, again, talking about good old Mike Hammer. And, it's typical Mike Hammer yarn, although it's much shorter. I haven't read any short Mike Hammer stuff before, but this one was pretty fun. Typical, super tough. If you look in an encyclopedia entry or dictionary entry under hard-boiled detective, you're going to see all the tropes that you would find in a Mike Hammer story. It's hard-boiled detective to the nth degree, really. Mike Hammer would just as soon beat or shoot somebody up before finding out if they're guilty or not. But once he finds out you're guilty, boy, watch out. This one is about him telling a backstory of how the night he died. Basically, he could have died when he got involved protecting this woman from her supposed gangster boyfriend and some other hangers-on. He takes a bunch of them out, but he soon finds out he's being used as a tool by a very dangerous femme fatale who stabs him and leaves him for dead. But, Mike Hammer is going to find you eventually, and when he does, watch out. Mike Hammer doesn't care if you're a lady. If you're trying to kill him, you're going down. Anyway, that's the kind of guy he is. Take it or leave it. Love him or hate him. Then I read another story, and it was pretty cool. This one's a Slot Machine Kelly story. Again, I don't have any feeling that this is a first case necessarily, because in this book, apparently Slot Machine Kelly in this story has been a detective for quite a while, a kind of a detective. He's a very seedy detective with the 1 foot kind of on the criminal side almost, at least petty crime. But this one is really fun, though, and it's written really well. It's by Michael Collins, the creator of Slot Machine Kelly, who I think was a character in The Popes. I think I have at least one Slot Machine Kelly story in my Black Mask, Big Book of Black Mask stories that I did a video about earlier this month as well. Anyway, this one is called If the Whiskey Don't, the Women Will. In other words, if the whiskey doesn't kill you, the women will. Those are the 2 weaknesses that Slot Machine Kelly has. He's called Slot Machine because he has only 1 arm. But he's still a pretty clever guy. And the story is narrated by his buddy who's working bar at this kind of dive down near the docks. And in comes this gorgeous redhead. Watch out, in private eye detective fiction, redheads are trouble for sure. Anyway, she comes in and slinks up and wants to hire Kelly to work with her. She wants to do a peep show, basically, where he would control the guys to peep, and she would be in the hotel room next door undressing and giving a good show, and they would collect and split the proceeds. And turns out that there's a lot more to this than it first seems, but Slot Machine Kelly is careful to watch his back. So when there's a crime and a death of a night watchman and I think $1 million in heroin or something was stolen and the crime is laid at his feet, Slot Machine's feet, looks like all bets are off and he's in deep, deep doo-doo. But he comes through with a pretty clever way to get out of that one and prove that he was actually with the redhead in question, as he said and she denies. Anyway, fun story. Really sharply written, and I enjoyed that one a lot. The next one that I read was just okay. It was The Amazing Technicolor Leisure Suit by Sharon Zukowski. And this is apparently featuring she's written several novels about this character. This is a PI, a female PI, a Blaine Stewart story. And, the writing was good. It was fine. It wasn't a particularly special case, but it was all right. And it seems pretty self-contained, so that the fact that there was a series based off of her work or off of this detective is interesting. But anyhow, she's a former cop turned detective. I believe they're in New York City, and she's partnered with a lawyer, and they've got their own firm, and they're really struggling when they're approached for a case. And of course, there's a lot more than meets the eye to the case. Pretty cool. And the guy who is the leisure suit, wearing the Technicolor leisure suit, which obviously is a play on Joseph and his amazing Technicolor dream suit or whatever that musical is. It's a decent story, but again, not top notch. I wouldn't say. It's probably the least memorable thing I read this month. And then I finally finished it up with a story, another novelette from my collection of Ivy Frost detective stories. These all appeared in Clues Detective magazine, and again on the inside of this wonderful Hafner Press edition, you'll see these beautiful reproductions of the pulps. They have the first 8 stories here, and I think they have one more in this flap. There were 17 stories in all, I believe, and then the other 8 pulps covers shown here in the back. I've shown this book off in the past in a previous book haul video from quite a while ago. Hafner Press does a wonderful job on their books, and this one is no exception. But that's also, the content is great. These are excellent stories. Ivy Frost. Here's Donald Wandre, by the way. Donald Wandre, who of course is famous. He wrote some Weird Tales along with his brother Howard Wandre, and he also wrote for other pulp magazines. He co-founded Arkham House Press with Auguste Derleth. Anyway, he wrote these stories about this Ivy Frost. It's actually I.V. Frost. I guess you'd say he's a professional. He is a detective. He is private. He does. He sometimes seems to be paid. Quite often, he'll do cases just on his own, interest. Really, he's much more of the Sherlock Holmes rational sort of detective type, but he's a total badass. He's like a combination Doc Savage, the Shadow, and Sherlock Holmes. Very cool. And his assistant, the beautiful Jean Marais, blonde here, who is perturbed that men, trip over themselves to, drool over her beauty everywhere else. But to Frost, he doesn't care at all about her looks, other than how they might affect their cases. But she's a badass in her own right, and does plenty of exciting action in this series as well. All 17 or so of these stories ran in 3-year period they were published in Clues Detective magazine between 1934 and 1937. And this beautiful edition has art by who does the interior art? Chris Kolb. Chris Kolb does the art, and before each story, each of these novelettes, there's some distinctive sort of woodcut style art pieces. Here's this one for Bride of the Rats. That's the story I've read. I've been going through these in order. This is the 4th story, and this was published in the April 1935 issue of Clues Detective magazine, and it's a really cool story. They're all kind of a dark, weird menace sort of vibe to these. They're quite cool and quite grisly. It basically opens, the first chapter has Jean Marais coming in a huff from having a lot of things go wrong, and then we have very similar to Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, we have Ivy Frost, Professor Frost, just outlining all the, making these deductions from a spot of a malted milk shake on her cuff of her clothing, to the lack of scuffing on her shoes, to slight bruising on her hand, all these things. He basically just details all the things she's been up to that day, and which kind of annoys her to no end. But by then, when that is finished, we get a kind of well written, showing off of Frost's deductive skills. There is someone at the door. She answers it, brings in this woman who seems kind of out of it, really, like maybe she'd been drugged, and she tells a really wild story of waking up in this castle with barred windows and going downstairs. She hearing scurrying rats in the walls everywhere, that she doesn't want to get out of bed because of hearing all the rats, but eventually she's hungry, so she goes downstairs and sees fruit on a table, and then an antelope walks into the room and she hears organ music, and there's no organ, and she freaks out and runs out of the castle, and it ends up basically being taken to by the doesn't go to the police. She doesn't really know anyone in town. She's taken to this kind of eminent psychologist for analysis, and then he sends her to talk to Frost. And Jean Murray, who we kind of is the viewpoint character most of the time, is like, what the heck is up with this lady? Is she wackadoo or what? Organ music with no organs, and scurrying rats, and an antelope at breakfast, and this lady's off her rocker. But it turns out she is not, and then something happens where the lady ends up dead inside Frost's protective laboratory. How did that happen? What's behind this evil plot that ensnared her and perhaps many other women as well? And what is up with the title Bride of the Rats? And eventually we find out, and it's pretty grisly and pretty exciting. And of course, Frost makes sure the bad guy meets his own kind of form of justice. He was planning to take him to the electric chair, send him up. He pulls together all sorts of scientific and forensic data. He's quite the science detective, or scientific detective, a la Doc Savage. But he is not if the guy's going to try to make a last-ditch attempt to kill him, then Frost will just happily duck out of the way to let the man meet his own maker at the hands of his own kind of cruel method of body disposal. Very interesting story. Again, is Frost a private detective? Yes and no. It might be skirting the line a little bit there, but just like Mohawk Daniels as a railroad detective. But they operate very similarly to private detectives, so I'm going to include them. Anyway, that was a very cool event. I was glad to be a co-host. Thanks to Jim for putting this together, and all the other co-hosts who posted their own videos and reviews about great private eye fiction, short stories and novels, etc. That does it for my July. I'll be going, as I did in a recent announcement video, which you should have seen before this one comes out. I'll be in the States, in America, for several weeks, haunting bookstores, as well as, spending time with family and friends and having a good old time traveling around the Pacific Northwest. But I'll be doing a lot of book hauling and mail hauling, so you should see some cool stuff coming from me there. But that does me for my reading for July. Thanks for watching as always. Take care, and I hope you are doing well. See you in the next video.